live. Hello everyone. I am just gonna wait here for a minute or two while some of you join up. And I see Christian's already in the conversation. Yay! Hopefully you guys can all hear me okay. I don't think I've done one of these before, so I have no idea if you can hear me or not. Oh, loads of you coming on. Hi everyone. So in a minute, I'm going to be joined by Cristian and we're going to be answering all your gluten-free questions. We have been sent so many questions. You guys are amazing. I was really shocked by how many have come through, and actually quite a few that are kind of along similar lines. So there's obviously some things that you guys are struggling with. So hi everyone joining up. I will invite Cristian in just a second. Just wanted to see who's going to join in. Wow, lots of you. Very exciting. So for those of you who don't know, I'm going to be speaking to Cristian, who is Coeliac Dietitian, well, at Coeliac_Dietitian on here. So make sure you go give him a follow after this. Now, the reason I've put this on is because I know with COVID, there's a lot of people being diagnosed with celiac who perhaps feel that it's more difficult to go and get help or support with things. And I know how daunting it can be when you are first diagnosed with celiac disease, or even if you've been celiac for a while and you just want answers to questions. So Cristian has very kindly volunteered to come on here and answer your questions, and we've been sent so many. So I'm going to attempt to, by the wonders of technology, invite him now. Let's see if this will work. Oh, hello.
Oh, here we are.
I made it work. Yay!
Yeah, first time, amazing.
Hi, Cristian. Thank you so much for coming on this live with me.
Thanks for the invite. It's my pleasure to be here, and I think this is fantastic. I'm really glad we can help quite a few people out, hopefully today.
Well, I hope you're ready because I have been sent a lot of questions. We've said we're going to try and keep this about half an hour, but we'll see how we get on. But first, Cristian, tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. So yeah, my name is Cristian Costas. I'm one of the gastroenterology dietitians working at Bradford teaching hospitals over in Bradford, and I specialize in celiac disease. And actually, I've been working in the specialty of celiac disease for about a year and a half. And I've been developing a bit of a new concept in the UK, which is our dietetic-led celiac clinic. So this is a service where within celiac disease, as dietitians, we really take the lead, and we take on a lot of some of the medical responsibilities. So we can order bloods for patients, we can request things like bone scans, so we can take on the full care of patients. And this was just an initiative that we did to change things up and actually relieve some of the pressures the gastroenterologists had. So that we had a consensus with them. So we still work really closely with the gastroenterologist, but we take on the full care of patients, and we can actually go into a lot of detail with the diet, which is what a lot of patients really struggle with.
Wow, that's sounds kind of groundbreaking, really. Like, I don't know anywhere else that's doing anything like that.
Yeah, so it's not brand new. It's definitely not brand new, but there's very few places in the UK that have a setup like this. So Sheffield are one of the main centres for celiac disease, and they have a service that's very similar. And we've kind of mirrored them in a way. I work quite closely. Well, I have a lot of discussions with Nick Trott, who's one of the celiac dietitians, and he's one of the celiac leads and in the world too. He's absolutely fantastic. But actually there's a few other places, but I'd say probably there's maybe about 3 or 4 in the UK that have a service that's like this, that's got a specialist dietitians leading with celiac disease. But I think the main thing is that we have a really strong multidisciplinary team with our gastroenterologist. So if I have an issue, I can run it through the gastroenterologist. We have consensus, because I'm not a doctor, so I can't interpret blood tests, but actually we can request them and chase them according to what our gastroenterologist advises to do. So it's really, I think we're putting the best of both there to work. We're using our resources really well, and we're getting great feedback from patients, and it's working really well. We feel like we're helping so many more patients than we did before. So the last year and a half, we've achieved loads. We're monitoring our outcomes too, and hopefully trying to present these at some point too, but it's all going really well.
Wow, that's amazing. And actually, I'd quite like to ask myself, because I was diagnosed about 18, 20 years ago, and I had a dietitian appointment at the time, and I've never seen a dietitian since. Is that something that you guys kind of keep on going with people once they've been diagnosed?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of people probably listening will be able to relate to that, and this is why we tried to change this. So before I was seeing celiac patients before coming into this post, but I think it's down to resources. Really, we're very limited as to what we can offer. So a lot of patients newly diagnosed with celiac disease, they were getting one appointment. Then hopefully two they'd get. Usually we were able to offer two, maybe like 6 months later, to just check they're on the diet, and then we might ask the GP after that to just check some bloods, and that was it. You'd kind of see the dietitian twice, but really, if you break it down, and you'll know, everyone will know that it's a massive lifestyle change. The gluten-free diet isn't as straightforward as many might think. Actually, 2 appointments really isn't enough to go into detail with everything. Make sure you're on it, and then people come back with symptoms, which is one of the reasons why this clinic works really well, because people come back with symptoms, and sometimes, yes, it's celiac disease and we can address that, but there's other things that are going on too with some people, and actually that's why it's good to have the gastroenterologist, so we can investigate some of these issues, and there might be other medical problems and actually help and make those decisions.
Wow, it sounds really good. So let's just hope they kind of roll something like that out a bit more widely by the sounds of it. I mean, is that what you're hoping when you present kind of how it's gone from your end?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why from the start, we're really keen on collecting outcomes so we can show that this is having an impact and how it's having an impact. So some of the main things that we're showing is that we're saving a lot of gastroenterologist time, then that's saving money. And actually we cost less than doctors. But we can still go into really good detail and help patients with compliance with the diets, because compliance or adherence, which we can talk about later, is a challenging thing. We can address it. We can actually reduce some investigations for some of these patients, because actually some patients might go for investigations if we don't know if they're following the diet. But as dietitians, we can help with that, and we can help with things like inadvertent gluten ingestion where people don't know about cross-contamination. So we can do a lot of that, and actually we can show it's a model that works really well, saves money and improves patient care. Then the goal is to really roll this out as much as possible and support other centers in developing these services, because it's can be a really cost-effective way of doing things.
Wow. And I mean, how have you kind of found things with COVID at the moment? Because I know that one thing that's come out of this is a lot of people saying that they have been told they perhaps have a blood test and then are told they have celiac and they don't have to go for an endoscopy. And also those sort of change, there are some changes Celiac UK's talked about coming with the diagnosis. I mean, can you talk a bit about COVID and that? Like, tell us a bit about what's happening.
Yeah, sure. So COVID's thrown a spanner in the works for everyone, pretty much, I think, in some ways. But with celiac disease, so the first thing that happened with and this has happened with a lot of outpatient services, is that they were reduced or stopped. So in our service was significantly reduced, but we identified that we needed to at least support the new diagnosis patients. So everyone else was pretty much put on hold. I joined in hospital, went on the COVID wards. A lot of dietitians have had to do that. Wow. And actually to reduce all of these, we've had to reduce our outpatient appointments, but then we're trying to build things back up. We're doing inpatient, outpatient, so we're really busy at the moment. And obviously we had a backlog of patients too. And it's been challenging, but that's why we need to rethink things differently. And that's why I'm quite keen to come on this platform and other ones to share information, because we can't share information through clinics like we did before. So we've got to think about different ways of sharing information and helping people. So I guess that's one of the first challenges, was the whole clinic capacity issue. And we're all trying to reboot services and improve things and get back to patients. The other one is the fact that the diagnosis has actually changed for celiac disease. So I'm not aware how many of you might know about this, but actually with celiac disease, usually you have a blood test, which is an antibody test. If that's elevated, then you would be sent for a biopsy. So that'd be a camera test where they take a sample of your small intestine, of your gut, and that would confirm if there's gut damage, that you have celiac disease. So you need a blood test and this endoscopy. But endoscopies all stopped with COVID initially. And then now there's been some guidance from the British Society of Gastroenterology, which is actually advising, there's some interim guidance throughout COVID, which is that you don't need a biopsy to get diagnosed with celiac disease. And this is quite new and probably shocking information for some people, but we've known in the research that actually the blood test, the antibody blood test, are very highly predictive, almost 100%. You know, I think we can never say 100%, but actually the British Society of Gastroenterology have confirmed that there's 2 blood tests, and they've changed an algorithm which they'll give to GPs so they can do these tests. And then this is, we've known this, so in pediatric patients, you know, what they have is a blood test. They don't have a gastroscopy at all. So some countries have actually stopped doing gastroscopies before COVID too, because they're quite predictive. So I think this is a big change, which is probably unexpected, but it's probably going to make things easier too. So it means that people don't have to eat gluten twice before the blood test, and then the camera test, a lot of people feel it's unpleasant too, and hard to go through. So this might make things easier, and hopefully with the data we have, it looks like it's a very accurate blood test.
It's going to be really interesting to see what it does to the diagnosis rates, because I know a lot of people are so reluctant to have to eat gluten, and then they don't like the idea of an endoscopy. So actually it'll be really interesting to see if more people kind of get diagnosed with it because they're more willing to get tested.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this hopefully will make it will make things easier for people to come forward. It will hopefully make the whole diagnosis process easier, because before, like, if you had a blood test, you might have had to go and see a gastroenterologist in secondary care too. There's a delay there. You have your biopsy too, but actually this can speed things up. And I think the whole thing with the guidance. So again, I'm just summarizing the guidance, but this is for people who are under 55. For anyone who's above 55, they will still be referred to a gastroenterologist, and then they will assess, because there might be something else going on with those patients. But for most people, if they've got these 2 blood tests, the antibody test, and they are raised to a certain level, then that confirms celiac disease, and that is enough. So I think there's always going to be these, you know, we don't have a 100% test that picks up everybody. There's going to be people who might be a bit what we call borderline, and then that requires a health professional investigating that and checking to make sure what the diagnosis is.
Okay, and I've just seen somebody's just asked, actually, is there any other way than a blood test to diagnose, because she's got a young son and she doesn't really want them to go through a blood test? Is there any other options?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So unfortunately there isn't, and even with pediatric patients there isn't. It's just a blood test, and this is the hard thing with celiac disease. It's a blood test eating gluten. We just don't have another way of saying at the moment. There's nothing that's non-invasive. We don't have a test that tells you how long you've had it there. It's just this antibody test. It's what we call the IgA TTG. Okay, that's one of them, and the other one is an EMA. And these 2 blood tests together are very highly predictive of celiac disease.
Okay, and someone's asked as well, can they get that done through their GP, or do they have to be referred to a gastroenterologist for that?
No, a GP can definitely do that. And I think for anybody who's wanting to take some information potentially to the GP if they want, Coeliac UK have got a page. The page is called what if it's celiac? No, or is it celiac disease? Okay. But if you go into Coeliac UK, you can find it, and basically there's a questionnaire that tells you the chances that you might have celiac disease, so you can take that to your GP too. But by all means, this is the good thing is that a GP has always been able to initiate that and do those blood tests in primary care. You just need to make sure you're eating gluten, and the advice is gluten for 6 weeks in at least meals. So it's 6 grams, which is about 2 slices of bread a day. And that's what's recommended, at least 6 weeks of eating gluten, and that should show accurately if your antibody test is your antibody levels are raised. That's the right amount.
Okay, brilliant. So someone's just asked a question, and this was one of the ones I had on my list to ask you, because we've had a lot of, it's kind of veering off the diagnosis now, but we've had a lot of questions asking about oats, because there's a lot of confusion. Some people are told they can eat oats, some people are told they can't eat oats. Obviously you've got oats and then you've got gluten-free oats. Can you explain from your point of view, should celiacs be eating oats, and if so, how, like, which oats should they eat?
Yeah, sure. So that great question again. I think this is very confusing for a lot of people, and I think the main thing is, and this is advice for the UK. I know people can tune in from different places, and some dietary advice for celiac disease is different because of how things are processed in different countries. But in the UK, if you have celiac disease, for most people, gluten-free oats are going to be suitable. They're fine to have. So I'll break that down. So really, when we're looking at gluten's found in four main crop cereals or ingredients, if you like, and these are going to be barley, rye, oats, and wheat. So for most patients, what I tell them is, if you just touch your eyebrow, then you can remember brown. That's your acronym: barley, rye.
I like that.
So it just helps people remember. But out of those, then the oats are obviously, you have to look out for them, right? But if you come across oats and it just says oats on the package, and it doesn't say it doesn't have a gluten-free sign, or it doesn't say gluten-free oats, they're not suitable because they're likely contaminated with gluten, and that's where we've got that cross-contamination. But actually, if your package of food, wherever you look and it says gluten-free oats or the gluten-free sign, then that is fine, and that's going to be fine for most people. However, there's a really small percentage of people with celiac disease that will still respond to gluten-free oats, and that's because gluten-free oats have a protein called avenin, which is similar to gluten. Now, this is very small, a very small amount of people, and that's why it's so important that we have follow-ups for people with celiac disease, because there's two ways of doing it. Some places will say, when you're diagnosed, don't eat any oats at all, and then at 6 months you start having some gluten-free oats and see how you get on with that. But other places will say, we'll actually start having gluten-free oats, and then if you have issues further down the line, we can reassess. And that's what we do in Bradford, because actually it's quite restrictive, and there's a very few amount of people that struggle with gluten-free oats. So we just say start with gluten-free oats, and the main thing is that you have a follow-up appointment. And that's kind of what you were saying before, Sarah, how many people didn't have those follow-ups, and that's why it's really important. So we can pick up these things if someone's potentially struggling with oats, and there might be some other things further down the line, but we can also make sure that they're progressing in the way that we expect with their celiac disease.
Okay, I'm just having a look. We've had a few questions sent in actually. So if I go back up to the latest one. So somebody's asked that they heard there was a gene test that could be indicative of celiac disease when family members have already been diagnosed. Now, I think that is the case. Can you talk us through a bit about how that works and who would get tested?
Yeah, so if the person's asking about this gene testing, so there are gene tests that you can do, and sometimes these can help clarify a diagnosis when the other markers aren't very clear. But these aren't enough to diagnose celiac disease. So again, it's about looking at that. It's having a healthcare professional, and anyone who's in that situation, I'd really encourage you to get that checked by a gastroenterologist or specialist so they can confirm the diagnosis. That's something that I'm aware of, all of those things, but I can't make any diagnoses. So if they're talking about the genes. But if they're talking about celiac disease and prevalence in your family, then there's a 1 in 10 chance of someone, a first degree relative, having it. So by all means, that's something that you can discuss with your GP to get your family tested, whether it's your parents, your kids, your siblings. So I think that's something worth doing too.
Okay, and that's interesting because we did have a couple of questions sent in as well about celiac pregnancy and fertility. So I don't know whether it's best to kind of cover that in one, but we did have one question asked about is there anything you need to kind of be mindful of when you're pregnant? And also another question asked about, can celiac disease affect your fertility?
Yeah, really good questions. So I guess there's two things there. So if we go with can it affect your fertility? So celiac disease can affect your fertility if you're not following the gluten-free diet. So we know that that's one of the complications of celiac disease. We don't understand fully why that is, but we know that that's documented in the literature, in the scientific literature. So actually, if you have celiac disease, it's really important, and you want to conceive, it's really important that you gluten-free diet strictly. That can really help. The other one is if you are pregnant or wanting to have a baby, then folic acid supplementation is quite important. Coeliac UK have got a full section on this. It might be hard to summarize here, but the supplementation is a bit higher. I think it's like 5 milligrams, if I remember correctly, or more potentially. But yeah, it's all on Coeliac UK. There's quite a bit of information there, and you can refer to it on there if you want.
Okay, brilliant. Another question we've just been asked as well. Somebody said, I have IBS and have been advised to eat gluten-free. I've had a celiac test, but it's negative. Gluten-free is a nightmare for me as I'm a nut allergy sufferer, which makes eating gluten-free hard. Do you have any advice? Now that must be pretty tough because a lot of free-from foods tend to have nuts in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is what makes the diet challenging. Is a lot of people will have the gluten-free diet, but then there'll be other things that they might be looking out for. One of the things that can really help is if you're aware of the gluten-free food checker app from Coeliac UK. If you're a member of Coeliac UK, you can download an app that scans barcodes for you, and actually it's got an allergen profile, so it's set up for gluten, but you can set up for nuts too, and you can scan that around the supermarket, and that might help you with reading all the food labels. But I think that I don't have any specific practical advice about foods to say this or that, because it depends on your preferences, depends on so many different things. But I think something like these apps can help. I think a lot of the information that I've seen on Instagram with bloggers like yourself, Sarah, there are a lot of useful information and practical information that you can all find. But I think it's one of the ongoing challenges. Same with people we have following the halal diet too, and eating out. It's just a logistical nightmare when you have more than one dietary restriction.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of getting used to what you can and can't eat and how to read labels. But yeah, more than one thing must be tough for anybody, I think.
And that app's fantastic. I don't know if you have any experience with it, but you're quite experienced with the diet, aren't you? But with a lot of people, especially starting, it can be really helpful because it can kind of re-educate you too. When you're starting to read labels, there's all this feedback that's important to have, so you're doing the right thing when you're reading labels. And that Coeliac UK app can just you scan the barcode and it tells you straight away, so it can be quite helpful.
Oh, it's incredible. And I remember back in the day before the app, they used to have what I called the Bible, which was like the book that they had. Yeah, and you used to go around the supermarket with your little book to see what you could eat. It was great. I'm so happy it's an app now.
Definitely.
So we've had a question just sent in now, actually, which is one that we have been sent by a lot of people. We've had a few questions about barley, and I think there's a few things to kind of confirm around barley. So one thing is, obviously, there's some confusion because we're told we can't have barley, yet things like barley malt vinegar we can have. Some things like barley malt extract is a bit of a grey area. And then we've been asking questions about beer, but perhaps we'll go on to that in a second. I just wondered if you could kind of give us a bit of an overview on barley, like what is safe to eat and what isn't.
Yeah, sure. And again, another really good question. And I think this is one that throws a lot of people off, especially when you diagnose. I think most people, they'll read, oh, you just got to avoid wheat, rye, barley. But actually, we break all of those down, and we've already talked about oats. You can have the gluten-free ones. With barley, there's certain types of barley, but it's really important to have a consistent way of defining the gluten-free diet. So the gluten-free diet is a diet where any gluten in it is below 20 parts per million. Okay, so usually what I say to most patients, to kind of put this into perspective a bit, is that we know that 50 milligrams of gluten is enough to cause gut damage for someone with celiac disease. 50 milligrams, you might, hard to put that in your life into context. But if you picture a slice of bread, you chop that into 70 slices, 1/70th of a slice of bread in one day is enough to cause gut damage. So, yeah. So that's why we talk about cross-contamination, because if 1/70th is enough to cause gut damage, for you to have, 8 gluten-free foods in a day and that cumulatively not be enough to cause you gut damage, it has to be way below 1/70th of a slice of bread. So not even a crumb, right? That's why 20 parts per million, we can't even quantify with the naked eye. So when we're talking about a gluten-free diet, then a gluten-free diet for celiac disease is one where your foods don't exceed that 20 parts per million limit. And that is what is protected by law for these foods. For something to claim it's gluten-free, it has to have less than 20 parts per million. So this is what happens with some forms of barley, that actually in the processing of that barley, there is less than 20 parts per million. And that's what allows that food to be gluten-free. So absolutely said malt vinegar, that's a food that a lot of people will restrict, but they can actually have that. And we see that with many of the foods. So there's specific cereals that actually they've got barley malt extract. So this is a really good example would be your Kellogg's cornflakes. They have barley malt flavoring that has too much gluten in it. But then some supermarket brand cornflakes like your Morrison's and your Asda. I think Tesco's just about to be reviewed on the food checker app. but these have barley malt extract and that has less than 20 parts per million of gluten. So what I say is that, yes, there's some of these exceptions, but you can't pick them up with the naked eye, because you will just see a box that says cereal with barley and it doesn't say it's gluten-free on it. So the best thing you can do is either contact Coeliac UK or use the app, you know. And I think where you need that extra help, there's stuff that you can't just do visually.
Definitely, and that app is amazing. And I think that's probably what confuses people, is that, am I right in saying because of the EU labeling, like barley has to be put in bold because it's an allergen, but that doesn't necessarily mean it always has gluten in. So I think that's what probably throws people off. Like this person said that their fiance wants to drink gluten-free beer that has a Coeliac UK stamp on it, but it says it contains barley. And I think that's what confuses a lot of people, understandably.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah, and that's why they've got to include the allergen, and that's the thing. You've got the allergen, but as long as it says gluten-free on there, then that pretty much trumps it, if you like. So if it says gluten-free, that is safe for someone who has celiac disease, and that's the hard thing, because they'll still use barley, but they'll use less than 20 parts per million.
Excellent.
That's what the name of the app is. So it's gluten-free food checker.
Make sure you all download it. Okay, brilliant. Now, another question we've just had in, actually on here and previously as well. Somebody's asked, should you regularly visit your GP if you have celiac disease? And someone else has asked us, they've kind of been celiac for a long time and they've never had a checkup. Now, I understand that, am I right in saying as a celiac, you should have an annual checkup with your GP? Is that correct?
Yeah, so we know it's not, the guidance doesn't define who you should have the checkup with, which is what makes it a bit more challenging. But guidance does suggest, so for your celiac disease, you should have some annual celiac bloods, and these check things like your gut absorption and other things. And that's one of the big challenges, is that I think the NHS is as a whole is stretched to be able to offer an appointment every year for the patient, and I think not every probably needs an appointment every year. So this is one of our challenges too. And before, we were trying to expand our clinics to see more patients, but really in Bradford we've got about 6,000 patients with celiac disease, and there's just one physician. So there's just no way I can keep everyone's yearly follow-up, see patients who are struggling, see diagnosis patients. So really what we've agreed with our gastroenterologists, and we're in the process of agreeing with GPs, and this is going to be different everywhere, is to at least be able to guarantee a blood test. And some GPs will do it, some won't, but ideally what every celiac patient should have is a yearly blood test. And then, you know, if you get an appointment with that, then that's fantastic. But I think it's really hard to make that practical and realistic.
Okay, I mean, I know that I did a blog post on this actually, because I got my first annual blood test last year for the first time in 18 years, and I was like, yay!
Oh, great.
But, if someone's not getting that, a lot of people have been like, well, I've never had this. Like, would you say to just contact your GP or whoever you normally would see? I guess a GP is probably a good place to start.
Yeah, definitely. And I think so I think not everybody will need an appointment. So if you say, if you have celiac disease, you're managing with a diet, you don't have any symptoms, you're quite clued up with things, then really it's just about having those bloods done, making sure that everything is fine. And this is, this is BSG guidance too. This is national guidance that celiac patients need these bloods. But then this is the hard thing, is kind of who does those bloods. It's not completely clearly defined, and that's why we're trying to create a very inclusive pathway where, yes, we might not be able to see everybody with celiac disease annually, but at least if we can get the bloods, and then if the GP can highlight issues, then that can help, and that way we can get the GP to refer to our clinic if they have any issues. But I think every completely different, and there'll be areas in the UK where there's not a specialist celiac dietitian too. So I think, yeah, the first point of call is checking with your GP.
Okay, brilliant. Well, hopefully that will help some people. I'm just looking at the comments, and loads of people saying that they love the scanner app, or saying thank you for recommending that so they can download it, which is great. Now we've had a question here, which we've had some similar ones. So someone's commented saying they're newly diagnosed and they're really confused about just how extreme to take precautions when it comes to cross-contamination. So some advice they're getting is very extreme and others are more relaxed. For example, like good cleaning practices, not sharing pans, that sort of thing. Like, how strict should you be with cross-contamination if you have celiac? And for those who don't know, can you explain a bit about what cross-contamination is?
Yeah, sure. So celiac disease, as we said before, it's unfortunately for people with celiac disease, gluten is toxic to your gut even to really tiny amounts. We're talking probably like less than a crumb. So that's why when we talk about celiac disease and the gluten-free diet, it's not just about the ingredients, about how things are prepared. Because if your gluten-free food comes into contact with other food that has gluten in the whole cooking or processing, then actually that becomes contaminated. That's why we say cross-contaminated. And the case with using, like the same oil. So if someone does some fish and chips with batter and you use that same oil for just some frozen chips, for example, then your chips will get contaminated. And it's the same with using the same toaster. So it's even to that level of use the same toaster as other people. But then in the kitchen, there's and I think that's a really good point with what that person said, that you can go really extreme and just say, I just have to have my own boards, my own space, and and go really extreme with things. But actually you can just wash your hands, wash the cooking items, and if you just wash them properly, that's absolutely fine. Using a chopping board, just make sure you wash that well. If you're using your cooking utensils, then again, just make sure you wash them well. It's same with all the like pots and pans. You can use the same ones, just make sure you wash them well. And same with we always try to offer options that don't cost really. So with things like if you're having issues with your bread, for example, the most expensive option is to get a gluten-free a toaster for your gluten-free bread. But actually, you can get some toaster bags which are reusable and that protect your toast, or you can just do it on a pan or in the oven with some foil paper. So again, things that don't cost you more money.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, I think
can you hear me?
you're frozen a bit there, Chris. Hello? Oh no, we have a technical issue. We got half an hour in. Oh, hello, you're back.
Am I back? Okay.
You're back. Oh, I panicked. I was like, yeah. You're so far through and then you lost. It's okay, you're back. Whew, panic over. Yeah, sorry. So the toaster bags are brilliant. I use mine all the time. And again, like you say, so much cheaper and easier than having a separate toaster.
Definitely, yeah. And I think even stuff like spreads are a challenge too. So, and this is why with celiac disease, it's really hard, because with most medical conditions, you can, or some medical conditions, you can kind of get away with not saying it, or most people try to maybe hide it or not share it because you don't need to. But with celiac disease, unfortunately, if you do that, there's a good chance you will get cross-contaminated, because people won't know that you're on that diet, that you need to avoid cross-contamination. So people in your household might be using spreads, and they might get a bit of butter, then put it on their bread, and then put that knife back in and get some more, and then those crumbs in there, and there'll be cross-contamination. So I think having an environment of people who know it around, it's the same as going to restaurants, to really explaining that about cross-contamination, because this information we're sharing here, not everyone knows about it, and even in restaurants, unfortunately. So which you probably have a lot more experience with, Sarah, where you've come across situations like that, haven't you?
Yeah, it can be really tough, and you have to be quite strict, because sometimes you'll go somewhere and it will say gluten-free chips, for example, and then you ask and they're like, oh no, we fry it in the same oil, and you're like, well, it's not gluten-free then, is it? And I think it's not always taking gluten-free at face value when it comes to restaurants, and making sure you're confident to ask, whether you do it before you go or you just ask them there. But if you find it difficult, perhaps ring up or email first to kind of get all your questions in, so you're not sat holding everyone up for dinner.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's that definition of a gluten-free diet, and that's what gets missed. So some restaurants' definition of a gluten-free diet won't be the one that you need for celiac disease, and that's what we try to clarify from day one, that gluten-free is avoiding with that brow acronym, but also your other ingredients, cross-contamination, just to be on the same page. And then if you realize that it's that level of detail, then it's how we tend to talk about 3 areas where you avoid it: in the house, when you're eating out, and in your supermarkets when you're looking at labels. So as long as you're applying that in those 3 areas, then things should go in the right direction.
Oh, you keep freezing again, Cristian. I don't want to lose you again. Hello? Oh no. I can hear you. It's all right. We're doing well so far. To anyone who is still with us, I can hear you. I just can't see you too well.
Okay. 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 I
Okay.
can hear you too.
Oh, I can see you again. Yay. Right. I'm going to plow on with the questions before I lose you again. Cristian, you actually sent something you got sent. I wanted to read out. Sorry, I'm just reading off my computer, so I'm not like being rude.
Yeah.
You got sent a question about living in an Asian family. It's really hard to avoid gluten completely. Everything we use from spices to sugar are contaminated, and it's been 2 years and they're still waiting for a dietitian appointment. I mean, this person sounds like they're having a bit of a nightmare with it. How do you deal with family members and living in a shared kitchen?
Yeah. So this is a really big challenge, and actually in Bradford, about 25% of the population in Bradford are South Asian. So this is a challenge we come across a lot, and actually there's even research documented about adherence with the gluten-free diet and following it. It seems to be lower and this is just one paper actually, but it's lower in South Asian ethnicities, and I think a lot of it is because it's really, really challenging when you're in a household with multiple members who might be eating gluten. A lot the staple food for the diet is a chapati, which will have wheat, and that's eaten usually in 2 meals. Obviously, people have different diets, but it can for many people they'll be eating wheat 3 times a day. So it's really restrictive, especially when if people don't understand the whole thing about cross-contamination. Then eating out, a lot of people from a South Asian community will probably follow halal diet too. So it's celiac diet and halal, and a lot of the restaurants that do your gluten-free food are big chains, but they don't do halal food, right? So
Yeah.
it is a logistical nightmare, whether it be in the kitchen, eating out, and even some like Asian supermarkets, the labeling might not be that clear, or some of the flours, like your buckwheat flour, for example, or we've seen that with gram or chickpea flour, they have a may contain, which we can talk about that later too.
Yeah.
It makes it really hard. So I think the first thing I'd like to say is that actually, you're not alone. It's really, really challenging. I think the best thing is using platforms like this, or areas where you can help educate your family. And a lot of times it's challenging at a cultural level. If people don't understand that fully, then they won't support you. But actually getting family and friends to support you is one of the best things you can do, because doing this alone is pretty much possible if you don't have all that support. So I think that's the first step. But the other one is actually what we're talking about when we talk about identifying gluten. Really being able to identify gluten can help so much with that. So if you're looking at some spices, herbs, or other ingredients, there's actually loads that are gluten-free in many supermarkets that you can get, even the fresh ones too. So there's a lot that don't have the may contain statement either. So again, I think that gluten-free food checker app can be really beneficial. And it's just identifying and picking your battles. Are you mainly struggling because it's cross-contamination in the house? If it's cross-contamination, what's in your power? What can you do there? Can you have that conversation? Is there stuff that you can just do separately? Is it a case of recipes? Because Celiac UK's got about 1,000 recipes on their website too. Is it a case of reading the food labels? Do you fully understand how to identify gluten? And can you use something like an app for that? Or is it eating out? And I think that's a big challenge, but actually there's a lot of information out there, and it's checking with these restaurants. So I think there's no one size fits all, but I think it's really picking your battles. And if you don't have an appointment with a dietitian, I think again, chasing that. But Celiac UK, they have a lot of videos there about how this might be useful for actually people who are newly diagnosed. They've got a coronavirus hub, and as of I think it was April or May, their dietitians created some videos going through the main things that will be useful for people who are newly diagnosed. So they talk about the diagnosis. They'll talk about recipes. Sorry, they'll talk about food labels. They'll go in detail with that cross-contamination. So that might help until you get your appointment. But I think ultimately chasing that appointment, having a bit of a follow-up, which is personalized, will really help.
I do think as well with family, obviously, one thing I found personally was helpful is to try and take more of an active role in the cooking as well. So if you're struggling with things like, you say a lot of families eat chapatis like twice a day, can you find a really good chapati recipe that's gluten-free and make it a challenge and use your family members to test it and see if they can like tell the difference and make it kind of a fun thing, as opposed to kind of being like, oh my gosh, no one can do anything in the kitchen, like you're ruining my life, which we've all been there and I've done that many times. But like, I have found the best, it sounds, you know, cheesy, but the best way to approach it is really positively and try and make it a fun thing rather than a restrictive thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is where with a lot of patients in clinic, we see that kids are actually fantastic. The little ones are the ones that are always like just trying to identify gluten and helping out. And I think it's picking who can help you, because you can't do it alone. And if you want to do it alone, it's such an onerous task. And we know this with celiac disease, that there's actually a very high burden of disease. So there's some research a few years ago showing that they asked people with different medical conditions to rate the burden of their disease, and celiac disease came second, only to end stage renal failure requiring dialysis, which is where you need to be
Wow.
3 times a week. Yeah. And this is because celiac disease, although you don't have, you know, it might not look so medical, it's the daily burden of being on a restrictive diet can get psychologically. So I think anything you can do to reduce that burden by using people to help you out, it can be really helpful, because it's definitely not a sprint, it's a marathon, isn't it? It's a lifelong condition, and you need a long gluten-free diet.
Definitely. Now, one thing that you touched on, which we have been asked probably the most questions about, is may contains. There's so much confusion about, a lot of products don't have gluten in the ingredients, but then there's that little may contain wheat or made in a factory which handles wheat and gluten. What's your view on may contains? What should we do?
Yeah, and again, another really confusing area, because if you just go into this newly diagnosed, you look and it says may contain, it's kind of just not clarifying anything, is it? So, but this is the challenge with celiac disease and labeling. It's not straightforward, and actually, if it says may contain, unfortunately, you can't guarantee that that is gluten-free and that's not going to damage the lining of your gut. So, really, when it says may contain, those foods will not be suitable. There's some exceptions, okay, and that's why I encourage people to check with Coeliac UK. So there's a few raw foods. So say, for example, sometimes you might find it on raw fish in that. So if you wash that fish, that's fine, because actually that is raw and that's not in the cooking process. If it's something like a crisp, then that's been cooked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just, we can't wash that off. No matter how much you wash it, that's already been cooked in it. But I think, you know, there's all of these things where you will see it and it's challenging. So I think, as much as it'd be, you know, people probably want to, you know, where's the exception? I think the best thing you can do is really check with Coeliac UK, because some of those may contain foods, some of them might be suitable, but only Coeliac UK will have that information, because Coeliac UK will check with the manufacturer and let you know. And that's where Coeliac UK can be really handy. So they've got a free helpline. You don't need to be a member, and you can just call. So I'd say if it's a food that you really want to eat or want to know about, call Coeliac UK, because they'll clarify. Again, you've got to get help with this, because it's something that we can't always identify on our own.
Definitely. And I know there was definitely like sort of outroar when like Sainsbury's, I think it was, started labeling all their fresh meat and fish as may contain all these allergens, and everyone was like, but it's a chicken breast, like why? And I think sometimes, do you think companies perhaps go a bit too far in trying to cover their backs, and that's why Coeliac UK is so helpful with this sort of thing?
Definitely. And I think it's the same, you've probably experienced this with restaurants where, you know, they give you a full allergen list, and you've got to identify, you know, you've got to spend half an hour identifying things, and it's just like, it doesn't need to be that complex, does it?
No, definitely not. Now I'm gonna just whiz through. I've got the questions on my screen, and I want to make sure we don't miss any, because I'm aware we've kind of whizzed through them like relatively quickly, actually.
All right, good.
I mean, it's been 45 minutes, and everyone who's still with us, I hope you're finding this really interesting.
Good.
So yeah, we've answered lots of questions about may contains, about oats. We've asked about sort of cross-contamination, pregnancy, fertility. We've covered quite a lot, actually, haven't we? A lot of people asking, I mean, there's some quite like specific questions. Somebody has asked, is it common for people with celiac disease to get heartburn or chest pain after eating? And if so, any advice with that? I mean, I haven't heard of that before.
Yeah, so again, these can be some digestive symptoms, and I think that's a really good one to. So I can kind of cover that and talk about some other digestive symptoms. So really, if you have celiac disease and everything's going in the direction we would expect, then your pre-diagnosis symptoms should resolve. We know that actually for what we call histological changes or changes to your gut improving and getting back to normal, can take between 6 to 12 months is kind of what we would ideally hope for, but actually we know it can take between 2 and 5 years. People who have had that initial biopsy and then they've had one after 3-4 years, it's still shown gradual improvement for some people. So again, it can take quite a long time. So I think the timing is important there. But actually, for some people who are on the gluten-free diet and they're absolutely, they're responding in the way we'd expect, some of them still have persisting symptoms. And that can sometimes be something else going on, where they might have some acid reflux, they might have heartburn. Some of them, some patients can have IBS. So we know roughly about 30% of patients with celiac disease can come back with symptoms. So it's kind of down to us, in clinic, what we do is we try to identify, all right, is that coming from your celiac disease, or is it coming from something else? And I think that's why it's something I would say that isn't common for most people with celiac disease, but it can happen. And then if it happens, I think the main thing you want to do is check that with a health professional, check that someone kind of verify that you're on the gluten-free diet and that, that's going in the right direction. And if you are, and you're still getting some heartburn, some chest pain, then that should be investigated so we know where that's coming from.
Okay, brilliant. That's really helpful. Another question we've been asked, I'll probably just ask one or two more if that's all right with you. I'm aware everyone's been with us a long time, so thank you everyone for watching. Somebody's been asking about their son has just been diagnosed age 6. A couple of questions she's got. She'd like to know if his villi and his intestine will ever fully recover. She's also asked about the fact that he's dairy intolerant. Might that go away? And finally, what on earth does she feed him when he's a fussy eater as well to keep him healthy? So a few questions there, sorry.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I'll be able to give just a
right
overview of everything, but yeah, good question with the villi. So that's linked to what I was saying previously. So we know for most people, this research is more in adults, but actually over the course of time, we know it can take between 2 to 5 years for villi to regrow and improve. So I think we haven't touched on that, but basically with celiac disease, for anyone who's not aware, there's a part of it which some people will have, you'll have symptoms, but actually the main thing with celiac disease is that gut damage, because when you eat gluten, you've got this autoimmune response and your body will attack itself at the height of the gut. And then that can cause physical gut damage, which is what can stop absorption of nutrients and increase risk of other complications. So really, that's what we want to completely avoid. And if you're on the gluten-free diet, yes, that can take between 2 to 5 years, which is why it's good to have some of these checkups. And I think in pediatrics, they do tend to have a consultant checking on them more regularly. But that's the main thing. And then with regards to dairy, I think that's another really good point. So one of the kind of complications associated with celiac disease is lactose intolerance. So there's a difference between dairy and lactose. So people who struggle with dairy tends to be more of an allergy to the protein in dairy. But lactose intolerance is the more common thing, and that's where you might get some digestive symptoms when you have milk. And that is because the villi, the part of the intestine that's damaged with celiac disease, is the part that will also break down this lactose in dairy products. So most people struggling with dairy products with celiac disease, it's usually when they're diagnosed and they've got some of that gut damage. But as that repairs, they should be able to start to tolerate lactose better. However, there's people who might have lactose intolerance that doesn't have to do with their celiac disease, and they might never be able to tolerate lactose properly. But again, that's why it's good to have an appointment to check through things. But if you've got all of that in a fussy eater, then that's a really big challenge. And I think all you can do is just make sure that you're happy with identifying gluten, and you're not, you can have, from a dairy point of view, it's lactose free, and that's the big issue. It's not the whole dairy, and that's the thing. We're wanting to make sure that the restrictions you make are the actual ones you need, that you're not over restricting the diet, and that's what a lot of people end up not sure about what to restrict.
Brilliant, that's really helpful advice, and I didn't know that about lactose intolerance and celiac, so that's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, but the good thing is that, you know, if the lactose intolerance is coming from the celiac disease, actually when your gut heals, you should be able to tolerate more and tolerate it normally.
Oh, brilliant. Well, Cristian, I think we've plowed through most of the questions. I'm sorry to anyone if we've missed them. Is there anything else that you think we should mention, or anything else you wanted to kind of cover?
No, I think we've gone through all of the main ones. I think it's just, you know, using all these information sources. I think people might not be aware of Coeliac UK, especially if you've had celiac disease for a long time. But Coeliac UK have changed a lot of things in the last few months. So it's probably worth going on the website. A lot of really useful videos. They've made their recipes available for free too. And then that app, they've got these two apps. So they've got that gluten-free food checker app, which we've talked about. They've also got gluten-free on the move, which is an app that you can use to identify venues that have gluten-free options within a radius too. So, and they've reduced the price for their membership. So they've got a digital membership now, and that literally costs £5 a month. So again, it's a bit more accessible if you just want the digital one. So that's that can help quite a few. But again, I just encourage you to go on the website and use that as a first point of call if you've got questions about celiac disease.
I think they might be doing a trial, actually, a free membership for 2 months at the moment. So definitely a good time to sort of go on and try them out.
I heard about it, but yeah, I haven't checked it myself. So is that right then? Are they?
Yeah, I think it's at the moment it's 2 months of free digital trial. So if you haven't joined Coeliac UK and you're thinking about it, now's the time to do it, and you can play with the app and go around and scan everything in the supermarket. It's really fun.
I think that will be really helpful because I actually. So in my clinics before, when they were face to face, we had like a phone and was scanning in front of patients to show them, because I think you've got to see it. You've got to see the benefit. And for most patients who come back, they still have it because they love it. It really, especially when you're newly diagnosed, it just helps so much. I think that's great. I'd encourage people to sign up to that.
Brilliant. Cristian, thank you so much. I think, judging by the comments, this has been so helpful for a lot of people. And I feel like I've learned loads. I mean, I've been celiac for 18 years, and I feel like I've still picked up a few things tonight that I had no idea about. So that's been brilliant. Just to kind of sum up, can you just remind us where people can find you and the kind of stuff you're putting out on your own channels, because you've been putting some really helpful stuff out?
Yeah, thanks. So I think the main thing is here on Coeliac Dietitian. So it's Coeliac_dietitian, and that's where I'm trying to put. So I've started this account over, I think it was roughly about a month ago, maybe something like that. And that's how I connected with you too, Sarah. And I'm just trying to put on useful information. So then definitely give me a shout, and I can try and put some more useful targeted information on there. That's the main place. We've also got a YouTube channel called Bradford Gastroenterology Dietitians too, and I've been putting some YouTube videos on there, but it'll mainly be through this channel that you'll be able to find most of my stuff. And then if you wanted to suggest anything that might help, I can try and contribute and create that.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for doing this, and it sounds like it's been really helpful, and a couple of people have said let's do another one. So maybe, you know, if people have got more questions, send them in, and if you fancy it, we'll do another little question answer. It's been really fun.
Yeah, definitely. I think especially whilst we're trying to rebuild clinics, it's just finding different ways to help people. And even if it's not just in Bradford and can help people elsewhere, then great. I think it's been really good. I really enjoyed it, and it's just great to be able to help people in these different ways.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Make sure you go and follow Cristian at Coeliac_dietitian. And I need to say hello to my boyfriend, Steve, who has watched the first thing that he's never watched anything that I've done before. So hi, Steve, I can see you commenting. I know you're there. All right, brilliant. Thank you, Cristian. And thank you, everyone, for watching.
That's great. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.